So it took me a month to figure out what I wanted to do for my 100th podcast, right? So before we get rolling, for those that don't have the opportunity to know who you are yet, go ahead and introduce yourself for me if you can.
Sure. I'm Mason Ward, friend of Kirk Fell. We met each other in 1994. Or you got him there.
96. I think 95,
Yeah, so
96.
I was there 94. I think you rolled in sometime in 95. So we served on the same submarine.
So I got there 3 months before we took it out of the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. So Mason, first of all, it's an honor to have you here. You had a pretty profound impact on me, right? And that dovetails into why we're doing this. For those that are listening, this was our 100th podcast. In this industry, this is my first podcast. Started with two of my closest friends in this industry, guys that I've grown up in this industry with. Basically, a few years after I left the Memphis, I literally stumbled into this industry by accident. We're going to talk about, and guys that I met in those early stages are guys that I've low crawled through my career with, and they're all fairly significant in their impact that they make to the industry now. And we've all kind of got to grow together. This podcast is the data center revolution. As we've talked over the times, this is my passion, is to open up the aperture of this industry to the rest of the world so they could see how cool this is. A pretty punk rock industry. I love it. But over the course of these last 99 podcasts, people have been like, hey, Kirk, there's people that like I'm going to be doing other people's podcasts where they're going to be drawing things out of me like I get to draw out of people that are sitting here. And people have asked me the things that matter most. And I said, well, if I'm going to talk about where it all started for me outside of my family, it would be on the Memphis. And who better than one of the meanest son of a bitches I've ever worked for in the Navy who to come be on this podcast with me, because your effectiveness as a leader is what made me a stronger sailor. Maybe not the best sailor, but a good enough sailor, right? And it helped put me on the path of where I'm at. It really helped me find what a good leader looks like. You guys defined what that looks like. And I was able to kind of, knowing what success looks like now through finding good leadership, I knew what to go find in the civilian fleet, right? So I'm really excited about this one, because another last bit of this huge monologue that I'm not trying to take away from this conversation with is, I'm starting this podcast. I mean, we're recording it today, but it's going to come out after the 80th anniversary of D-Day, right? And every year since we started our company, on the anniversary of D-Day, June 6th, we run all the way up to Patriots Day, September 11th, and we do a very special tribute to trying to hire military. We call it Anchors of Hope. And in that period, we really do everything we can to help. It's a pledge this year in which we're trying to get companies to take the pledge to hire at least one veteran in that window. It's like a 98-day window, and if we can get people to hire veterans. So I'm really, I just got done doing a podcast series based on power, and you would have loved it because you're a big fat brain nerd, right? But the reality is now we're doing one on this Anchors of Hope window, June 6th, 80th anniversary D-Day to Patriots Day. I really am focused more on leadership. I focus a lot on data centers. I focus a lot on power. Right now, I want to take a little bit of time and focus on leadership and focus a little bit of attention on the military with it. So there may be some people listening to this podcast that are just data center nerds that may not be interested in this, but I hope that they pay attention for the leadership side, because what they don't know is you could teach a class on how to do certain things. You are a Mustang, right? So Let me ask if I could start by peeling this backwards. Like, where did it begin for you? Where are you from?
So originally from Dallas, went to high school. I was mediocre student at best, pretty wild and crazy in high school.
That is unbelievable considering your brain. So were you an athlete?
Soccer player. Yeah.
Were you any good?
I was okay. I was okay. Yeah, good enough to play varsity my sophomore year or whatever.
I got you. Varsity soccer in Dallas. What part of Dallas, by the way? Like
East Dallas. So about as close to Garland as you can get without not being in Dallas anymore.
Gotcha. And that's where you're born and raised up there, huh?
Yep.
Were any of your family military?
No. Well, my uncle. My uncle was in the Navy in World War II.
Okay. Did that have an influence on you, or
it did. So long story. I guess we got time to peel it back a little bit, right? So as a kid, I was naturally super smart, but I had no work ethic, no discipline. So what happened to me is I coasted my way through middle school. I coasted my way through like my freshman and sophomore years of high school, and then I hit a wall. And that was the point at which my natural smartness and zero work ethic took me. And so,
That's funny. I was the dyslexic version of that.
Yeah.
I had a work ethic, but no brain.
Yeah.
Right?
So, I mean, we all have our limitations, right? But anyway, so, there weren't any, MITs knocking on the door to get me to go there. So I took a very small, measly scholarship and I went to junior college and there in Dallas, and I did equally as poorly in junior college. And right about that time, a guy walked into my life, Bob Chrissy. I think he was a second class engineman at the time. And he's like, "You need to go to the Navy." I'm like, "Really?" He's like, "Yeah, you need to go to the Navy and you're smart enough to go to this nuclear power program." So I was like, all right, whatever. So I took the test or whatever to get into, enlist in the nuclear Navy. And I did well enough. And so they put me on this delayed entry thing so I could finish up whatever the semester of junior college that I was going through. And then off to boot camp I went, Seaman Recruit Ward.
Oh, shit.
Off to boot camp.
When is this, like early 90s?
March of 87.
Okay.
March of 87 is when I went off to boot camp, and I showed up there on March the 20th because I was, right after my birthday or whatever I remember. So went through boot camp, did fine. And, what the Navy does is it kind of forces the discipline on you. So with the discipline forced on me and a reasonable aptitude to learn stuff, I did really well in machinist mate A school. Okay. And then when I walked across the sidewalk or whatever to nuclear power school, that's when I started seeing the officers walking around. And I'm like, that might be something, that'd be cool.
Maybe I should have stayed at junior college for a little bit.
Maybe, or whatever, graduated from college, but that's not the way it worked out. So, I started asking about officer programs. So I applied to a couple, NROTC and ECP, that's the Nuclear Enlisted Commissioning Program. And then I went on to power school. I did okay there. And I can remember then after power school, you go up to prototype. And I did okay there. That's the first time you start to have close interaction with the officers. And I decided, hey, man, that's what I want to go do. And so I remember that's when I started having interviews.
Was there any specific officer that you ran into that had an influence that made you be like, I want to be like that guy?
Yep, Harvey Guffey.
Okay.
Yeah, Guffey. And in
was
prototype,
he a Mustang as well?
I don't even remember. I just remember he was approachable and he would answer my questions when I would track him down in the hallway. I don't know what he's doing now, but I asked him, what do I got to do to put on the same, Ensign Guffey, uniform that you have on? And he told me, gave me some tips for the interviews or whatever. I did the interviews and it turned out well.
So after prototype, you got picked up?
Yeah. So I went all the way through prototype, got qualified at prototype, and then I was accepted into the NECP, Nuclear Enlisted Commissioning Program. And there were 7 universities that you could go to for that program. So Texas, New Mexico, Idaho, Auburn, a couple other places, but kind of a no-brainer for me.
You came from Texas.
Because Texas was home. Yeah. So I applied there and in the summer of 90, rolled onto campus. Yeah.
I knew that because you wore, when we'd be on underways, when we were deployed, you'd wear that, Texas sweatshirts and shit, So I knew that that's where you went. I remembered that you were a machinist mate because I unpackaged some of this from you from one night when you and I were standing a mid-watch, standing on, we were up in the bridge, surface transiting, and I started kind of peeling back your onion, trying to figure some shit out. Because at the same time, I was getting ready to apply for Boost, the Boost program. Ryan Ogden, if you remember him, he got picked up and stayed. He's just getting ready. I think he just retired as a captain. But you've gotten the P3s. He was a cockpit guy. He did very well, right? But shifting back to you, there's a program where I feel that the military does it. I mean, just bookending that for a second, I think the military invests hundreds of thousands of dollars into advanced weapons and machinery and technology, and for us to learn those things. And I say that because I'm going to dovetail all this back into how we try to get more veterans positions of employment. But for those that are civilians and listening, I mean, let's talk about it from this perspective. Why do we send our kids to college in the first place?
Hopefully so they learn and broaden their experience base.
Why does that matter?
So
they can get a good job?
That's not why I want to send my kids.
Okay. But what's this hormone? I mean, the construct of society is we send our kids to school to get good grades so they get to a good college. If they go to a good college, they get a good job. And if they do that, they get good money. And if they do that, they can be happy. Would you agree that tends to be the...
No, so that's a bigger discussion, right? Can money buy happiness? And I always say, no, money can't buy happiness, but money can buy time. Money can buy free time. And if you do the right things with your free time,
then you'll be happy.
Happiness, right? But it's not a direct link.
I think, though, that there's a lion's share of people listening, or a lion's share of those that are listening that have either done this. I mean, I'm paying right now. I got kids in college. I got 2 kids in university. I feel like it's not a bad place to be if you're not sure what you want to do yet. And that's kind of what, in my opinion, it is. I'm paying for my kid to learn how to live on their own and how to grow up and create their own relationships and understand, what the value of a dollar looks like, things like that. As a byproduct of being there, they're going to have to go get some grades, and they're going to do some other things. When they're done after 4 years, they're going to have a degree. And then society will say, hey, they graduated. Even Uncle Sam will say, cool, you could be an officer now, right? Because you just have to have that degree to be an officer, or you just have to have that degree to get that job in corporate America.
That's right. So it provides opportunities, right? So for me, right, what I see is my kids are just moving towards college now. I see it as I reflect back on all the things I learned while I was there, both, 50% academic and 50% everything else that I learned. I mean, I grew probably more in those 4 years as much as I, did in the Navy up to that point. And that's a huge amount. And then, as you say,
so say that again.
It doesn't.
You're saying that you're comparing the equivalencies of your time in college and what you learned to what you learned in your time in the military, and there was almost equivalency over the course of...
I'm very different, but I'll say and I was 20 when I went to boot camp. So the 20-year-old that showed up at boot camp through prototype, I learned a whole lot in terms of discipline and just, how to execute day to day. But then, I learned a whole lot of more broader knowledge and just
you learned how to learn
stuff in college.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was different. And I would say they were roughly equivalent in the amount that I grew in each of those phases. Cause they were 2+ years, 3 years in the Navy, and then 3 years in college. Cause that's all I got was 3 years.
Sure. But my thing is, I think
that's all the Navy gives you.
But I try to look at it. I think that's pretty cool, actually. I like, though, how what I'm trying to demonstrate is you can send your kids to college to go get more opportunities, but you could also send your kids to the military because they're going to get trained they're going to have a lot of money invested in their training in some capacity. And that too will also allow them to go get more opportunities when they leave the military. But it's about trying to go get an education, whether it's through the trades, the military, or college. You're just trying to get to more opportunities.
Yeah. I mean, but peel it back a second. Look at everything that the Navy gave me and gave you.
Let's talk about it. Yeah, I think it's an advantage, actually, what they gave us. I feel like they gave us, I mean, you opened it up with your whole story. You were gifted and talented intellectually with lacking discipline. Uncle Sam is really good at rebuilding the constitution of a human being, and they start by helping you discover what discipline really looks like. And once you take that, you could harness that power that you had upstairs, right? And I think that's the advantage is when you send your kids to college, discipline is an option. When you send your kids to the military, it's not an option.
It's not.
And I think that is the advantage that we had. I'm not trivializing what our civilian counterparts do, because I work amongst, only 1/3 of my business is active, former military, but the other 2/3 have a paramilitary mindset that is very selfless in nature, and they're very committed to their future, right? They're just investing a lot into growing professionally, and that's why they're there. But for you, like, you had this pretty amazing career, right? And that's why you specifically, I wanted to have this conversation with, because you got the best out of all of it, right? You got to learn what it was like as an enlisted person, and you went through all that training, and then you got to get into the officer program, and that's the part of you that I met. I didn't know the other part, right?
Yeah. But
I knew that you came from a hybrid approach into the game. And I like those unorthodox approaches to the game. I think the more creative we could find, there's so many ways that you could leverage go to college. If you don't like it, go in the military. And then if you change your mind, use the military to get back into college.
That's exactly right. So to rewind it all the way back, what's so funny is, Bob Chrissy, my recruiter in the very beginning, I'm like, well, Bob, I'm really, kind of set on this finishing college thing. And he's like, if you want to go to college, the Navy will send you to college. Now, for me, it was absolutely true. I won't say that it was as easy as Bob made it out to be, but, I started from the very beginning with that was kind of a goal, and I didn't relent until it was done.
Did you have some support? I found a lot of support when I was trying to get into the programs, right? So but hold on, going back to you, when you got picked up, did you stay there? Right. How does that transition work when you go from enlisted to officer right at the same duty station?
No. So that doesn't happen. Okay. So I finished at prototype. I was at E5. I reported to college as an E5.
Getting paid as an E5 while in college?
Getting paid as an E5.
Good for you.
And 2 years in of my 3-year college degree, I took the E6 advancement exam and advanced to E6.
Nicely done.
So I was getting E6 pay.
While in college.
Yeah.
And they're paying for it.
That's
dude.
Right. They did not. So this particular program
but you
did
started
not
from
pay
Texas, so Texas has its own college fund for it.
No, I used GI Bill. Okay. So I just used my regular old GI Bill to pay for all the tuition and books, then got my E5/E6 pay while I was going, and continued to rack up time and service towards retirement. That's the huge part.
Yeah.
3 years and 1 semester at UT all counted towards my active duty time. So
I think it's fantastic.
Yeah. So, look at that. That's just nuts.
I know. That's a huge advantage. So you commissioned the day you graduated then?
No. So sorry, I kind of blanked there. So you finish up with school, and then your ROTC counterparts that you had gone through the program with, they get commissioned right there at college. The NECP people have to go on to officer candidate school. Oh, really? So I had spent a little quality time up in Newport, Rhode Island for a few months, and then got commissioned. Yeah. Right. Where like the guys that have been there for, 4 or 5 months. And so the guys that have been there for 2 months get to yell at you like.
Then you're like, I was an E6, bitch.
Yeah. I was like, all right, I recognize I got to go through this process, and part of the process is you yelling at me. So you get it over with as quickly as you can, and we'll both go on about our business.
That's crazy. So you put around, so you're up there for OCS.
So then you get commissioned from there, and then you go back to nuclear power school all over again, prototype all over again.
As an officer, you have to go to a different school?
Yeah, it's all different, dude.
So you were just in school for like 11 years.
So I know the dates. So here are the dates. So I left for boot camp in March of 87. So you can consider that kind of starting school.
Holy cow.
And I arrived on the Memphis, my first actual, non-school, real working duty station in October of 94. So that's 7 years of nothing but school over and over
So
again.
not only that, but so you enlisted, and 8 years later you had gone to prototype and power school twice. Yeah. And got a college degree.
School once. Yep.
You should break a record. You need to put that in your shadow boxes.
School, right?
Holy shit. I had no idea, but it's fantastic to talk about this, because I want to talk about the range in which the military offers kids opportunities.
Let's look at this. So boot camp, their discipline gets injected, right? Machinist made A school. That's essentially mechanical engineering. I did that. Then when I went back to college, electrical engineering, so I did that. And then the Navy's formal education for what I was supposed to do on the submarine is nuclear engineering. So I did that. My kids are like, you studied all these engineering stuff. Do you use them now? I'm like, not really.
No shit. We should talk about that too. Because I was telling someone about some of the cool things you got to do once you moved off of the big boats, right? So the Memphis was the first boat, but that's not where you got your warfare pin from, right?
It was, and I got my warfare pin on USS San Juan. Right, because when the boat's in the yards like that and can't go to sea, they farm the officers out to get qualified on other ships.
What was that like? Was that cool? Were the other subs cool with that because you were relieving a watch?
Yeah, I mean, I think they were just happy to have somebody else on board, and I kind of got the feeling it's, we're going to invest some effort to get this guy qualified, and it's not going to pay off for us right now on our ship, but, it's a fleet thing, so... they kind of treated me as one of their own. I didn't, I had a great experience qualifying on that boat.
Would you recommend your kids, are you indifferent? Like I didn't tell my kids where to go to college or to go to college. It was their decision. They had options, I'm like, you go to the trades, the military, college, figure it out, but you're not staying here. Right. So, and it's hard right now, military, when you enlisted, it was in 88.
87, yeah.
And we weren't even in the Gulf War back then, right? So that's a peacetime. It's an easier decision. We're in peace right now, right? The war on terror is over, right? So right now is another good opportunistic time to get into the game I'm trying to figure out how to get people to look at the military as not plan B. We looked at it as plan B. I went to college first and then ended up in the military. You went to college first and ended up enlisting too. And that's okay. And it both did and being paid dividends, obviously, for both of us, right? But I'm trying to paint during this really patriotic window between the anniversary of D-Day and Patriots Day, taking pressure off of people, because this is the time of year when people are getting out of high school and looking at colleges, or getting out and getting ready to look into their senior year of high school. And I'm talking about an industry that is starving for talent.
Yeah.
And people coming out of the military have a lot of skills in addition to a lot of discipline, which activates those skills.
Yeah. So here's what I'd say. You asked me if I would encourage my kids to go in the military or if I'm different. I guess I would say I'm a little indifferent, right? I want them to select the path that works best for them. But, a choice.
You wouldn't be against it.
Oh, no, of course not. Of course not. There are many paths to success.
Sure.
Right. And I don't think that the path to real success, whatever your definition is that's not going to happen in 4 years, right? You're going to go to college and get a degree, and then you're going to have to figure out your way to happiness from there, or you're going to join the military and get out. And I'm pretty convinced that, 98% of people that get mashed through the military machine are going to come out on the other end with the ability to figure out how to succeed at whatever it is they want to do. Because I think that's one of the things that it does really teach you is the time in the military is how to figure out how to succeed at whatever it is, just in general.
So let's talk about that a little bit more. This will be a little bit more of the fun part of the podcast, because it can't all be about trying to inspire, right? Some of these podcasts have to also entertain, right? So you had a front row seat from the wardroom of watching Petty Officer O'Fell report to duty at the Memphis.
Yeah.
And I got to tell you, man, there was no greater joy than being a junior sailor on the Memphis, because the expectations were very low. And I was able to still fall far below those expectations in terms of Liberty calls, at least.
Yeah.
But what was it like, getting to that boat? You'd gone through a lot of the enlisted shit, so you kind of understood stuff. I mean, from the optics and how we viewed things, I guess, and what was it like? What was it like being an officer? What was it like? Because I remember vividly not liking you at all, right? I was like this. I felt comfortable knowing that you were the smartest guy in that room all the time and that you were the best officer. But as a derelict, no one wants to be. When you're mediocre, when you're a B player, A players and B players don't like each other. And I think at that time when I showed up, I
think there were A players that didn't like me either. There's not it's hard. So
you were the DCA. I mean, like, you were an assassin with your questions. You could walk anywhere. I'd see you walking. I'm like, I'm going to go walk the other way around. Because if not, he'll ask me a question.
So the question is, what was it like on the boat? So
right.
let me just wind back just a little bit. So when you're a prototype, you fill out this form, and it's like, your dream sheet, right? Exactly. So the one that I filled out, it's got, what ship type would you like? Would you like a fast attack submarine, a ballistic missile submarine, or some kind of surface ship or whatever? And then it's like, what home port would you like to, serve out of?
None of this matters. They just want you to ask.
No, but you know what I wrote? You know what I wrote at the bottom? Any operational submarine out of any home port. And I underlined operational. Any operational submarine out of any home port. And they sent me to a refueling overhaul. Literally, when I got
its home port.
No. I mean, it's not an operational submarine. I'm like, how hard was it to just pick any submarine going to sea and send me to that one? I don't care where or what. And when my orders came in, it said Portsmouth, New Hampshire. I'm like, no, it said Portsmouth something. I'm like, is that Virginia or New Hampshire? Do we even have a base there? And so, no, refueling overhaul, there I went. So to put it in context, that is a fate worse than death.
That's the
going
worst.
To, I mean, every third night you're sleeping on the boat, you're doing 14 plus hour days every other. So like the day before, your duty day, that's a 14-hour day. And then you're spending the night on the boat, and the next day's a 14-hour day. So you're an absolute zombie all the time. It's just terrible. So, you were not getting the best version of me, even on a good day, right?
Oh, is that why you're such an asshole?
Yeah, well, that's part of it. And then, when you're a junior officer and you report to the ship, right, they just hand you a stack of reactor
RPMs.
plant manuals this tall and say, read all those and figure them all out and, figure out what to do. So I hope we can get to, how do you get from that point to being an actual leader on a submarine? Because that's super hard. Because there from day one, you are worthless to everybody until you get qualified to stand some watch. And the demands that are being placed on everybody are so high that they look at you and go, every day that you're not qualified, you are useless to me. So you got to get qualified right away so you can do something to help.
What was the fastest watch you qualified?
Well, in the shipyard, right, they actually qualify you as ship's duty officer first before engineering duty officer. So you get qualified ship's duty officer so you can sign tags and, keep the front of the boat from, just self-destruction while refueling overhaul, the heavy lifting is being done back in the engine room. So then you turn right around to that. But, my experience on that was, I reported on board. They made me like the electrical division officer aft, and literally within a month, I was the main propulsion assistant back aft, in a refueling overhaul, which is so, not only do you have all this responsibility to kind of figure out this maintenance stuff, you're trying to get qualified watch stations, and then you're trying to figure out how to be a submarine officer on a submarine that's not going to sea. So it's challenging, and it's not a whole lot of fun, and you're not in a great mood.
No kidding.
So, what you were seeing out of me, I think, is...
No, it wasn't just
this guy's
that makes a lot of sense.
This guy's overwhelmed, right?
Everybody was. When I literally got there probably, when I said 3 months, it was probably a month. I was there at Portsmouth for a month.
Right.
And I remember reporting to the sub base, New London, dropping off my shit, and then they put me on a plane to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, Kittery, Maine, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I remember everybody was just absolutely bitter. You'd walk in and you were the FNG, and no one gave a shit. No one wanted to talk to you. I only had one guy named Billy Coons.
Yeah, Billy Coons.
Billy Coons was like, yep. Are you the new guy? Come here. And you know what I'm saying? You know where that story goes. You're like, oh, there's always that guy, right? So, and I love Billy, by the way. He became an officer as well, right?
Yeah, he did.
But going back to you, I want to know what you had to go through to learn, because by the time that I saw you, you had created a standard, right? And that was a good standard. I mean, we all respected it. No one liked it, but at least we knew we were going to be safe because there was a standard.
Yeah. So this is one of the things I was hoping we'd get to talk about here. And that is, I think what you saw at the point you got to the boat is, I think I had like managed to mash my way through the reactor plant manuals and the forward books.
You were quoting pages, man.
I was getting qualified. I was qualified, right? And so I had sort of reached at least a reasonable level of technical competence.
Yeah.
Right. And so all that discipline that the Navy had hammered into me, allowed me to read, digest the material as quickly as I could, get it stuffed into my brain to where it didn't get out. So, by the time I was standing watch forward with you, I won't say I was proficient, but I was marginally not dangerous.
You were the best officer on the boat, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, look, thank you. Kind words.
There were some tough ass officers. There were some good officers. There was one or two in there that I could have done without, of course, right? Every ship has people get through the cracks at every rank. But I didn't understand the politics that goes on in a wardroom and the dynamics and the chemistry between the officer side. From the outside looking in on the enlisted side, everyone had a great deal of respect and reverence for you. And
I wasn't well liked by peers.
You were, for me though, I would totally agree that liking was pretty standard around the 360, but I think it's only because you did put off a very I don't give a fuck if you like me vibe. And as a leader,
that's true.
Well, hold on. So that's what I'm trying to get to. Like this whole podcast is about leadership, and there's no one that's more transparent and organic as you when it came to that leadership. And there's a reason why every time that there was an Oris or a tree, I was standing watch and you were standing watch too.
That's right.
So we both knew each other through that. We didn't really know each other because you didn't fraternize with the enlisted, and I understood that, right? And no one really did. There was a very clear line. I mean, we treated our officers as officers, and if they liked you enough, they wouldn't use the word petty officer when they'd call you. They'd just call you O'Fell. You knew if they liked you when they wouldn't use your rank first. If they just liked you, they'd be like, O'Fell, come here. If they really like you, they'd be like, hey, dipshit, come here. I got called that a few times, but we had good leaders.
Yeah, we did. But let's talk about that real quick, because I would not characterize what I was doing at that point in my career as really leadership or leading.
I would agree.
It was enforcing a crushing standard.
That is it.
And it was demonstrating my own. So one of the things I think that's important to talk about is on a submarine, everybody depends upon the professional competence of everybody else. And and senior to junior officer to enlisted, you gain respect of those around you by technical competence.
100%.
Because
that meant safety.
Yeah, that means safety for all of us.
Safety's number one, yeah.
Right. And not just like peacetime safety, but, if it got to
losing the ship, yeah.
Right, then you wanted,
the best
a
guy
stone cold killer, right? So, I feel I recognize that right away, that my job was to become technically proficient. And the submarine is this rare microcosm where you can gain respect through nothing but technical competence.
Yeah, that's your muscle. Intelligence was the only
That's right. I don't think that's universal. Maybe in all military communities, and it's absolutely, I can tell you for a 100% fact that does not translate directly out to
the civilian
the civilian world and industry. It just doesn't. It doesn't translate. So one of the things is, it's interesting, and I said this to you in Maudie's about, a year ago. You and I were on, I don't think you recognized it, but you and I were on completely parallel development paths. We both showed up to the boat about the same time. The first order of business was to become technically competent. And from there, we evolved from technical competence to leadership, right? On the boat at that point, we were managers of processes. And from there, you have to expand to leaders of people. You don't manage people, you lead people, you manage processes. And we were managing processes. We were executing, right?
Yeah, I mean, tag outs, danger tag outs, like that's the first time you
come
came
into periscope depth.
Yeah.
It's all just a process, and we manage those processes. But
that's you keep going because I want to dovetail in, but I'm going to interrupt you, and I don't want to do that.
No. So I want to talk about. You were on Memphis longer than I was. Or later than I was. I left.
Oh yeah.
And so one of the things that I really want to talk about is the difference between Memphis and Augusta, which was my second boat. And what I got to see there, and this is no knock on any officer that served on the Memphis, because I'm telling you, that shipyard environment is soul crushing.
Yeah.
It is absolutely soul crushing. And being in the yards now did not afford the opportunity for the guys to mesh as a warfighting team and to start to progress, grow into being an inspiring leader, right? We were just treading water, trying not to drown, because as soon as we got out of the yards, then we had weapon cert, then we had horses, and then we like blinked and we're on kind of a softball deployment, right? But there was just no time. So, by the time I left, I would say the culture on Memphis, and I've seen a whole lot of submarines. I've ridden a whole lot of submarines, and I would just call it, average at that point, because that's where the ship was in its cycle. And that ship could have had the most inspirational naval officer ever placed on the face of the earth, and it would have been in the same spot.
Just the life cycle.
I think you saw it get to meld and grow and grow.
Yeah, I did 3 deployments with it, so I got to see. You're right. So if I were to just measure the wardroom when you were there was not a lot of inspirational leaders, but there was incredible technical, knowledgeable leaders. There were a flush out of those officers over the course of time where we were picking up new officers that were replacing division officers and department heads, and those ones, they were bringing the passion. They were coming from the fleet.
Yeah, absolutely. But what I got to see on Augusta is here's what I would say. There are, 100 submarines, 90 of them are going to have average culture or below culture. The guys that just are, bitching every day about being at work or how much, the wardroom or the officers or the chiefs or whatever sucks and, terrible, whatever we're doing. And then there's like 10 or maybe fewer where the boat for some reason has hit this tipping point of leadership and inspiration, and the guys start to feel good about it. I mean, the bottom line, submarine's hard business, period. And I don't care what you do, right? There's, what do they say? It's like 10,000 hours of boredom followed by 5 minutes of sheer terror, right? It's just not, there are a whole lot of times when it's just not fun, but there are those few boats that hit that tipping point where they're proud of themselves. They're like, this is our boat and it's the best boat ever. And I got to see Augusta go from just an average boat or whatever, below average boat, maybe, to an unbelievably good boat.
That's because you were probably around much more inspired people.
Yes.
And so, I mean, that's going to influence output and productivity for sure.
Yeah. And so to kind of continue on this theme, the difference between managing processes on on Memphis, then I had some unbelievable mentors on Augusta that just, it's another one of those short periods in my life where the step change in my maturity and my leadership capability was just exponential. I mean, just step.
But was it intentional or was it in spite of? Okay, so there was somebody, like when you left and you went to that, did you go from one boat right to the next?
No, I was a Squadron 2 operations officer
for how long?
3 years. So I did 94 to 98 on Memphis, 98 to 01 on as the Squadron 2 operations officer, and then 01 to 04 on Augusta.
Were you there was it just Barron, or were you there for Brewer as well?
I wasn't there for Brewer.
Okay. That explains a few things too, right, as we're talking these things through. But I did start seeing, like, I saw it's funny from the optics and how you viewed it, right? Where you sat inside a wardroom and felt like you said, average. And I got to be honest with you, I respect the way that you maintain that standard. Like, if I don't think there's great and then everything else is average, right? So, and with regards to backing up and rewinding, as you would say, to part of the narrative where you were talking about the likability factor of Mason Ward. Yeah, I don't know what the likability factor of Kirk was back then, right? So, like, I don't know if the beauty about—
You make me laugh every day.
Well, I used to look, I think that people weren't laughing with me. They were laughing at me when I'd take those beatings from, like, Brooks.
There were some times that I was laughing at you and saying, yeah, look at that. There's justice in this world. A fella just got what he deserved.
Well, listen, were you the officer that found me buried underneath the bilge once? Would Dave Brooks wedge me?
So the part that I witnessed was I was doing a tour or whatever, and I went down into the machinery room, and Dave Brooks looked up at me like this and then looked back down, and your boot was above his hand, right? One arm, because that's how strong Brooks was, right?
He was a monster.
He was holding you by one leg with your boot above his hand, and the rest of you was down in the machinery room bilge.
He
that
would
I couldn't
bounce me.
see.
He would bounce
so
me
I
off
didn't
it.
see all that, because pretty much as soon as I saw it, I'm just like, I'm going to just turn around and tour someplace else.
So what had happened, let me explain. Let's put a pause in this story of leadership and talk about entertainment again. So we also had another guy named Chief Johnson, but he was Petty Officer Johnson and Petty Officer Brooks. They both made chief, remember?
Yep. Bronze Johnson. You know what I remember about him? He had to, like, pull the seams out of his poopy suit arms because his arms wouldn't fit in the.
Same with Brooks. Yeah. Brooks was so big when he got his khakis for a chief that he had to use scissors or something to clip the inside because his guns were too big. Yeah. And to put into perspective, Danny LaFleur from Texas and I used to take on Dave Brooks and Chief Johnson all the time. And they would let us start by zip tying. We would zip tie their hands behind their back around the poles. Oh my God. And then they would just be like, go nuts. And by the time, look, and we would go nuts, but one of those guys had punched me so hard in the forehead that, like, I just came back around and I was sitting there like,
I think I've heard this was in the diesel booth.
Oh yeah. Those guys just smoked me. So what had happened is they were, if you're a submariner, you're going to love this story. You're in the A-gang shack, you know, that little phone booth. And I'm hiding in there during a field day because the two senior E6s are pressure washing the diesel engine. And they're standing waist deep in the bilges, and they have their poopy suits down, tied around their waist, and they're both monsters of men with huge guns. They're 6 to 8 feet away from each other, standing back to back in bilges, so they can't get out of the little gritter that they're in. And these dipshits, and I say this because they can't find me and track me down in life now, they left their pressure washing guns out on the deck in between them, and I'm standing in the phone booth, able to reach one.
You're like, oh, this
I had no choice.
Good.
So I pressure wash one of them through the back. That thing could take the paint off the engine. And I'm hammering Johnson. And Johnson is just standing there taking it. And then I put the gun back down. Now Brooks was looking the other way. So then I go back in the booth. And just then, Brooks turns around and picks up the gun. And Johnson just turns around and sees Brooks with the gun. Johnson goes, hey, can I get it? And Brooks gives it to him. And then he sprays Brooks in the face. And then I'm laughing so hard I fall out of the booth. Look, we're on deployment. I could not do my laundry for 3.5 weeks because the laundry room was right next to the egg shack.
That's right.
And I was there, like, there was a bounty on me. Like, I was hiding all over the submarine in everybody's racks and stuff. No one could catch me because I'm like, don't let Brooks know where I'm at. Yep. And they caught me, and I took that beating hard. And I think you saw the tail end of that one. But Danny LaFleur had taken harder beatings than me. That man.
That's a hard man right there.
Look, I saw him get knocked out. All right, he was the battery control execution forward coming out of the battery tank, whatever. And Dave Brooks punched him in the forehead and knocked him out. And Danny is on the ground. We get him up and we're waking him up. And the first thing that came out of his mouth was to Dave Brooks was, "Is that all you got?" And I was like, I don't even know why you guys bother hitting this man, because you're never going to, like, that's the most unbreakable human being Daniel LaFleur was. He was one of my favorites because he would take every beating, right? I mean, he just didn't give a shit. But like from the side that I sat on, we had the King of Pop. We had some good officers. I thought that there were definitely cliques. I think that we were insulated a lot by the Chiefs quarters between anything that existed, because they would try to guide us around shit and make us. I mean, they put enough pressure on us to get our jobs right and do our things right that we weren't paying attention to the news and sports in the wardroom. But you can see friction and shit. But I did see, I did see a lot of growth and development over time. And when I think, like you said, getting Barron out of the shipyard, different type of CEO or different type of CO, I should say, and then getting the guy that was he was the commanding officer of CO school, I think, at some point, right before Breer got to us. But there was we saw swap outs and stuff of, navigators. I had a guy named Lieutenant Mack replace Scott Graff, and Mack, I think he's a 1 or 2 star now, and he's a stud, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
There were some great leaders too. But
I will tell you though, the thing that got that boat out of the yards and got it on track was the Chiefs quarters. And I'll say, like I said, as the squadron, operations officer, I rode all the boats of that squadron, and then,
so you saw
that was far and away the strongest Chiefs quarters that I ever saw.
Memphis?
Yeah, far and away.
Well,
not even close.
I mean, I had Master Chief Bruce Lee.
Yep, you've had him here. Yep, and then Chevy.
That man hated me.
He's good.
He hated everybody.
God, he was good.
Like, he had a reason to hate me.
Tony Brockwell. I don't know if you had too much. Sonar Chief.
He was awesome.
Stud. Yeah. My favorite, Tony Brockwell. So, the Sonar Shack was right off of Control, right? Yeah. And so, we're supposed to be doing a pre-watch tour or something, and before you relieve as officer of the deck. So I'd walk into Sonar, and I'm like, oh, what's going on? And there'd be some kind of shenanigans going on in there or whatever. They weren't doing exactly what they're supposed to. And Chief Brockwell turn and look, he'd say, "Sir." And he was like our size guy, right? Not a
monster.
Brooks, right? And he'd go, "Sir, can you step out of the Sonar Shack for a second?" There was that curtain door thing at the front. And so I would go back and tour something else, but shut that door. And it would sound like, a Bugs Bunny cartoon in there, like furniture getting thrown around. And then the sound would die down in, and I would go back in, and it would be like perfect in there. Everybody was doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. You have a question, sir. Yeah, total stud, that guy.
Well, I think that from the leaders that we saw there, I think some of them that we had pushed us to maybe. If you were saying at that time you were trying to evolve as a leader from a manager of process to a leader of people, learning how to do that through immersion, right? You had to have other leaders around, and sometimes to maintain a standard, to set that standard as an outlier, it can be viewed abrasive by the others, and that could be easily misunderstood for that liking part, right?
Well, I mean, let's call it what it is. I was immature. I was a good manager of process, and I knew how to operate the ship, but I had not, I'm certain that there were great leaders, inspirational leaders that passed through Memphis and I was exposed to. But the problem is in that shipyard environment, there's just no room for inspiration. Like I said, you can't.
I don't think that, yeah, you're right.
Or at least that was my perspective from my perspective. But then, once I got to Augusta, had some great leaders pass through there. My last CO is the greatest guy I'd ever worked for. And he took the entire ship and put it on his back.
Did he write a book about this?
No,
okay.
He didn't. He should.
There's a couple books that maybe it's the Olympus or something.
Mike Homer, that dude is unbelievable at creating culture and empowering.
What did you learn?
People.
What did you learn most from him? What are some of the things that we can learn from that?
So, I thought this through.
Of course.
So there's about 2 or 3 things. I want to start with the easy ones. And if we get to the hard ones, we'll get to the hard ones. But let's get to the easy ones first. So each ship has a set of CO standing orders, right? And there's this one table in the CO standing orders. And on the first column, it's got all of the things that need somebody's permission to do. Take the ship to periscope depth, get underway, start up the reactor plant, transmit this message or that message or the other message, or do something else, right? And then across the top in the first row, it's got the people, like, the division officers or the department heads or the XO or the CO, right? And there's X's in all of this thing. And so one day, and this just happened over and over, but the first time just sticks in my mind like it was yesterday. So one day I walk into the CO stateroom and I'm like, request permission to do whatever it is that I was requesting permission to do. And he just looks at me and he goes, Nav, do you think I add any value to giving you permission to do this? And I'm like, not really, because, I know the questions you're going to ask me, and I've already made sure that the conditions were right, and you're not going to go behind me and check to make sure that I'm, did all that stuff. You're just going to let me do it. So no, I don't think so. So he just pulls his pen out of his pocket and he scratches it out and he puts the X further down. So further down the line. So one of the things that I saw is we've got all these X's, and over time, they just migrated to lower and lower and lower levels of delegation. Now, the key is he didn't take his eyeball off people screwing stuff up, right? So if you screwed stuff up, maybe the X moved back up, or you got a little bit of training along the way on why, it was the question that you didn't ask that you should have asked or whatever. But it was this sense. And it wasn't just that he empowered people, he gave them the sense that it was their decision. So they became the new gatekeeper and the new standard setter for whatever that was. And everybody just grew. That's just one example, right? Of just making people feel like they got a part to play. And it just rolled all the way down. I mean, all the way down the chain of command.
That's awesome. Did you see yourself leaving? Because I want to go into some of the cool things you got to do, right, that you're into now. But did you leave from that ship like inspired to go? Did you want to go be an XO or a CO, or did you just want to go a different route and have fun?
So,
because you got to do a really creative part of it.
I did. So this is a crazy good question, and it actually had the opposite effect on me.
Interesting. So
this particular deployment, the last deployment on Augusta, the culture was great. People were like making special up and down the waterfront, were making special requests to get assigned to the ship. This tremendous momentum. We were battle E-boat, the whole bit. So it was good as it could get. And then we went and did this deployment. This was, the beginning of shock and awe. So we got to shoot a whole bunch of Tomahawks. And then right after we shot Tomahawks, we got to go essentially to a completely different ocean and do a completely different mission, completely unheard of.
So you checked all the boxes. You're like, what else is there left to do?
Every box was checked. And I reflected back across all the wardrooms that I'd been a part of. So this was the first where I started to say to myself, it will never get any better than this.
Yeah.
And it could, reflecting back and watching the experiences of XOs that I had, observed across the time, my calculus was it could get a whole lot worse. So when I left the ship, I had screened for XO and, I was on the path.
Sure.
So I don't know how you want to segue into the the next version of.
Well, you got a pretty cool job after that. So like, is it another guy that you knew? How did you fall into that?
So I'll tell you a funny story. So we get off leadership and back to a little bit of a funny story again. So, back in about, I guess, 1996, you remember the Sea Power magazine you'd find them, lying around the ship, and it was some Navy publication or whatever. So one day I'm sitting, around
I was
96.
in it once, that's what I remember.
Oh, you were in one?
Well, they came down to the ship and they took a bunch of pictures, and it was me looking through a periscope with somebody else, and it made it in the magazine. It's just random.
Nice. So anyway, so I pick up the Sea Power magazine, and it's got an article about the new Navy's Advanced SEAL Delivery System. And they're supposed to, I think ultimately produce 3 of these boats. Some of them were assigned out to Hawaii, and some were supposed to be sent to Virginia Beach. And I'm like, that's what I want to do right there. That would be the coolest thing ever. And right, the actual relative probability of seeing
the chances of getting
one
on that.
guy gets to go on staggered, 1.5 year tours, right? So you start figuring up the odds of that. So I'm like, that's what I want to do. So I go home, right? I tell my wife, I'm like, this is the greatest thing ever. And she's like, where is that thing? I said, well, the one now is in Hawaii, but they're supposed to have another one in Virginia Beach. She's like, I don't want to go to Hawaii. I'm like, no, there'll be one in Virginia Beach. This is a great thing.
Sucker.
So I started reading and I started asking questions. So for whatever reason, they preferred navigators. So the job was a post-department head shore tour job. So they wanted navigators. I'm like, okay, all right. So I got to figure out how to get myself into a navigator job. Okay, fine. And then the next thing that I figured out through the grapevine is you had to be Navy dive qualified. So one of the problems that they were having is guys would get assigned to the SEAL command and then go to dive school and fail. And now they got this guy on their books. He can't do the job. So then they got to transfer him, get another job. And now their rotation's all screwed up. So I told you I was a Squadron 2 operations officer. I convinced my Commodore to let me go to dive school while I was there. So I had all these boxes checked, right? So I tell the detailer right before we deploy, I'm like, that's the job I want. And he's like, yeah, blah, 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 whatever. So we pull in at the end of that deployment to Norway. And so I get in the little Norway phone booth. I call him. He's like, you can have ASDS. I'm like, oh, there's only one, right? He's like, yeah, it's in Hawaii. I'm like, oh, I do here.
What are you going to tell your wife?
Yeah. And so I'm like, okay, here's what I need to do. Takes 10 days to get across the Atlantic Ocean. You got a 4-day reactor exam on the end of that. That's 2 weeks. And then I need a week to socialize this thing with my wife and tell her and all the stuff like that. And so we pull back in and I'm starting to sweat bullets about how we're going to get through this. And she's standing on the pier. I would have hoped happy to see me after.
But she already heard.
Squadron Master Chief, right? I had been assigned to the, Squadron Ops. So I knew the Master Chief at Squadron, right? He had come down to the pier and he's like, hey, congratulations on your orders to the little coast.
Oh.
She's like, she's like, I knew immediately what had happened. Okay.